The wind was dying when Ruth Callahan reached the end of the dirt road, her baby heavy against her shoulder and her courage running thin. The ranch house ahead stood quiet under a low orange sky, the kind that made every shadow look longer, every sound sharper. She knocked once, then again softer, half hoping no one would answer, half praying someone would. The door opened to a tall cowboy with dust on his boots and a face carved by too many quiet years. He didn't speak at first. His gaze moved from her torn hem to the child bundled in her shawl. "I can work," she said quickly, breath shaking. "Clean cook, mend, whatever keeps us warm." The baby whimpered, and she bounced him without thinking, her hand trembling. The man leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, eyes softening a little. "You walked far?" he asked. "From town," she murmured. "No one hires widows anymore. They say we carry bad luck." A long silence followed, the kind that feels like judgment until it isn't. He nodded toward the lamp flickering inside. "Bad luck's just weather. It passes." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. He stepped aside, slow and deliberate. "Come in. Supper's on the stove." The room smelled of beans and wood smoke. A coat hung neatly by the door, worn but cared for. She hesitated, fear and hunger fighting in her chest. "You sure?" she whispered. "Ain't no one else here," he said, setting a tin cup on the table. "You and the boy look like you need a roof more than I need quiet." The baby reached for the steam curling from the cup, and the man smiled for the first time. Small, almost hidden. "You can stay tonight," he added, voice low. "But only if you eat." She nodded, tears rising uninvited, and the baby laughed as if he understood mercy before she did. For the first time in weeks, she let the door close behind her. The wind fell silent, and the lonely ranch took its first breath of warmth in years. Ruth woke to the smell of coffee and the low hum of boots pacing across the wooden floor. For a moment she forgot where she was until the baby stirred, and the memory came rushing back. The stranger, the fire, the warmth that didn't ask for anything. Sunlight spilled through the cracks in the shutters, painting thin lines across the room where her son slept beside her, wrapped in a spare blanket that smelled faintly of pine. She sat up quickly, smoothing her hair, heart thudding with the old habit of apology. In the kitchen, the cowboy poured 2 cups, glancing over his shoulder just long enough to say, "Name's Jack Harlan." His voice was deep, steady, the kind that didn't need to fill silence to be heard. "Ruth," she said quietly. "And this is Thomas." The baby cooed, stretching his small fists towards the light. Jack set 1 cup near her on the table, no questions asked, just the soft scrape of tin against wood. "You don't owe me," he said. "Not for coffee, not for staying." She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck because thanks felt too small. Outside, a crow called from the fence post, and the sound broke whatever barrier was left between fear and belonging. Jack moved to the door, looking out across the pasture where fog clung low. "Fence is half down," he muttered, almost to himself. "I'll fix it before noon." Then, without turning, he added, "There's stew on the stove. Eat when the boy wakes." She watched him go, the rhythm of his steps steady, purposeful, almost tender. The day passed in quiet chores. She cleaned the table, washed the cups, fed Thomas, and when she stepped onto the porch with the baby in her arms, she saw Jack at the fence line, sleeves rolled, hands working slow and sure. He looked up once, meeting her eyes, and nodded like a man greeting peace for the first time. Something inside her loosened, something that had been locked since the day her husband's coffin sank into the clay. "Thank you," she whispered to no one, but the wind carried it toward him anyway. and he tipped his hat without a word. The sun climbed higher. The air smelled of cedar and hope, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a stranger to the world. By mid-morning, the air had turned sharp and clean, smelling of cut grass and smoke from the stove. Ruth had found a rhythm in the small chores, washing the dishes, folding the blanket, humming under her breath to keep Thomas calm. But every sound outside drew her gaze to where Jack worked the fence line. He moved like the land itself, slow but certain, his hammer finding each nail without need for measure. When the post splintered beneath his grip, he didn't curse, just knelt, brushed the wood, and mended it like something sacred. Ruth stood on the porch, her son balanced on her hip, and for the first time she saw what silence could mean when it wasn't cruel. It wasn't emptiness. It was peace earned the hard way. Jack turned slightly, catching sight of her, and lifted a hand in wordless greeting. She raised hers back before realizing, cheeks flushing, that she'd smiled. At noon he came in, set his tools down, and poured water from the kettle, his shirt damp with sweat. "Fence'll hold," he said. "Looks strong," she replied. "You fixed it alone?" He shrugged. "Been fixing things alone a long time." She wanted to ask why, but the question felt too heavy, too close. Instead, she ladled stew into 2 bowls, and they ate across the small table where sunlight pooled between them. The baby gurgled, smearing potatoes across his chin, and Jack chuckled. A low, quiet sound that made Ruth's chest tighten with something dangerously close to hope. When Thomas reached for him, Jack hesitated before taking the small hand gently, letting the boy grip his finger. "He's got strength," Jack said. "So does his mama." The words startled her more than kindness should. Outside, a wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of rain and the promise of change. Ruth cleared the bowls, her heart pounding at the simple truth in his voice. "Thank you," she murmured, "for letting us stay." Jack stood, brushing his hat clean, and looked at her like someone seeing color after years of dust. "You don't thank a home for letting you in," he said softly. "You just make sure it stays standing." She didn't answer, but her hands shook as she reached for the baby, because somewhere between the fence and that table she'd realized she wasn't planning to leave anymore. By the end of the week, the calm she had begun to trust cracked like thin ice under boot. Ruth had gone into town to trade milk for flour, Thomas bundled tight against the chill. The general store went quiet the moment she stepped in, just as it had before in other places. 2 women by the barrels whispered behind their gloves, and a man near the counter leaned toward the clerk, muttering, "That's the one staying with Harlan." The words hit her like thrown stones. She kept her eyes down, counting coins with shaking fingers, but the clerk's pause told her more than any gossip could. "Didn't know Jack took on help?" he said. "He didn't," she replied evenly. "Just offered kindness." The man smirked. "That what they're calling it?" Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat she wanted to leave the sack of flour and run, but pride held her still. When she turned, Jack was standing in the doorway, quiet as a storm about to break. He'd followed her, whether to town or to trouble she couldn't tell. "You done here?" he asked. His tone was calm, but the air shifted, and even the clerk looked down. Ruth nodded, gathering the sack, her son fussing softly. Jack stepped forward, took the weight from her arms, and said, "You got a problem with who works my land?" No one answered. He didn't need them to. They walked out side by side into the wind, and she hated herself for feeling both humiliated and safe. Back at the ranch, she tried to speak, but he stopped her with a glance. "You don't owe them your shame," he said. "They trade in it because they got nothing else." She stood by the doorway, torn between gratitude and guilt. "They think," she began, but he shook his head. Let him. You know the truth, and so do I. His voice softened. That's enough. The words settled over her like a blanket after cold rain. Later, when the baby slept, she stepped onto the porch and saw him by the corral, staring at the horizon as if trying to remember what peace looked like. She wanted to tell him he'd given her some of it back, but instead she whispered it to the night. And somehow, he turned and smiled anyway. The storm came without warning, just a hard crack of thunder and the sudden rush of wind slamming against the windows. Ruth had barely pulled the shutters closed when Thomas started crying, a sharp, feverish sound that sliced through the cabin. She lifted him, felt his skin burning, and panic rose faster than prayer. The air reeked of rain and fear as she soaked a rag and pressed it to his forehead, whispering nonsense just to keep her voice steady. Outside, boots pounded the porch. Then the door swung open, and Jack stepped in drenched to the bone, rain dripping from his hat brim. Fence is gone on the west ridge, he said, then saw her face, and the baby's. He's burning, she breathed. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her. How long? Since dusk. I don't know what to do. Jack's hands, rough from rope and cold air, became careful as he dipped the rag again, cooling the boy's head with slow, rhythmic motions. He'll be all right, he said, though his voice wavered just enough to sound human. The thunder rolled again, shaking the walls, and Thomas whimpered before falling silent, his breaths uneven. Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging. He's all I've got left. Jack didn't answer. He just reached out and held the boy against his chest, whispering low like a man praying without words. Minutes passed. Then Thomas let out a soft sigh, small and alive, his breathing steadying against the cowboy's heart. Ruth sank beside them, trembling from relief. Jack smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from surviving something that almost wasn't. He's strong, he murmured, like his mama. You saved him, she whispered, but he shook his head. You did. I just helped him remember he's safe. Outside, the storm began to fade, the rain softening into rhythm against the roof. Ruth looked at Jack, the rain still glistening in his beard, the tenderness he tried to hide. And something unspoken settled between them, heavier than the wind, gentler than sleep. When Thomas finally drifted off, Jack laid him back in the cradle and stood, his hand brushing Ruth's shoulder as if by accident. She looked up, eyes shining. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Get some rest. But when he stepped outside into the quiet rain, he didn't go far. He stayed on the porch till dawn. The storm had rinsed the world clean, leaving the valley washed in light so soft it seemed borrowed from heaven. Ruth woke to the sound of quiet, the kind that only follows fear. And for a moment she forgot where she was. Thomas still slept, his cheeks cool, his small hand curled near her arm. The fire had burned low, but warmth lingered. She rose, careful not to wake him, and stepped outside barefoot into the wet earth. The porch boards creaked beneath her, and the sky glowed pale gold over the hills. Jack sat on the steps, boots muddy, hat beside him, eyes red from a night without sleep. He didn't turn when she came out, just spoke low. Did he make it through? He's fine, she said softly. Because of you. Jack exhaled, his shoulders sagging as if he'd been holding the whole ranch on his back. Wasn't me. Just luck and rain. She smiled faintly. You don't believe in luck? No, he said after a pause. But I'm starting to believe in second chances. The words caught her off guard. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the damp from his coat. You got one once? She asked. He shook his head. Never took it when it came. Lost a good woman for it. Silence followed, filled with the sound of a meadowlark somewhere near the barn. I'm sorry, Ruth murmured. Don't be, he said. She'd have liked you. She had your stubborn heart. Ruth laughed quietly, the sound surprising both of them. You don't even know my heart. Jack glanced at her, eyes crinkling. I know enough. You fight quiet but hard, same as me. They sat there a long time, saying nothing more, watching the light crawl across the wet grass. A single drop from the roof landed on her hand, cold and real, and when she looked at him again, he was already watching her, that unreadable calm back in his face, but softer now, like the rain had carved something open. When Thomas stirred inside, Ruth rose to go, but Jack spoke before she reached the door. Ruth, he said, voice low, you can stay as long as you need. She turned, meeting his gaze. And if I need forever? His jaw tightened, but his answer came quiet, steady. Then the ranch has room. The morning stretched slow and golden across the valley, as if the storm had left a gentler world behind. Ruth fed the hens, humming softly while Thomas toddled through the grass clutching a wooden spoon like a weapon against invisible enemies. From the corral came the rhythmic sound of hammer on post, and when she turned, Jack was working shirtless under the sun, driving new rails into place where the fence had broken. Every swing looked carved from patience, not pride. She should have gone back inside, but her hands hesitated on the door. Something in that sound, work after fear, felt holy. When he finally looked up, wiping sweat from his brow, he caught her watching and smiled the smallest smile. Fence'll hold now, he called. She nodded, pretending to busy herself with the wash bucket. You always fix what breaks? She asked. He shrugged. Only the things worth keepin'. The words hung heavy, and for a moment neither spoke. Later, while hanging damp clothes on the line, Ruth saw him walk toward her, holding a tin cup. Coffee, he said. You look like you could use it. She took it, fingers brushing his. The warmth went deeper than she meant to feel. Thank you, she whispered. He glanced at the little boy giggling in the grass. He laughs easy, Jack said. You must have taught him that. Ruth smiled faintly. He learned it when life stopped hitting so hard. They stood in silence then. Two people who'd both forgotten how to be seen. When he turned to leave, she said quietly, You could come to supper tonight. He paused. If you're asking, I'll bring the biscuits. Then it's a deal, she said. That evening, the lamplight spilled through the window. And for the first time since she'd come, Ruth set 2 plates at the table. No shame, no fear, just an honest meal shared under a roof no longer borrowed. By late afternoon, dust rose from the road leading up to the ranch, a single rider cutting through the heat. Ruth stood on the porch with Thomas on her hip, squinting into the light as the shape grew clearer. It was Mr. Dalton, the storekeeper from town, his black hat tilted low and a paper in his hand. Jack stepped out from the barn, wiping his palms on a rag. Afternoon, Dalton called, voice sharp with the kind of tone that always came with bad news. Got a message for you? He dismounted, handed Jack the folded paper, and cast a look at Ruth that made her spine tighten. She been working here long? He asked. Long enough, Jack replied, without looking up. Dalton smirked. Folks been talking, saying she's taken advantage of your kindness, saying maybe the boy ain't hers. Ruth's jaw locked, her arms tightening around Thomas. You can tell folks to mind their own fields, Jack said, his voice even but iron hard. Dalton shrugged, clearly enjoying the tension. Just passing words. Sheriff says you owe back tax on this land too. Says if you can't pay, they'll auction it come harvest. He tipped his hat and turned to go, leaving the dust and poison behind him. Jack didn't speak for a long while. He unfolded the paper and stared, jaw clenched. Ruth stepped closer, heart pounding. What does it mean? He looked at her, the exhaustion plain. It means we got 3 weeks before they take the ranch. She felt the world tilt for a second. The future she'd just begun to believe in sliding out from under her. I can help, she said quickly. I can sew, I can sell bread in town, You've done enough, he cut in, too harsh, then saw the hurt in her face, and softened. I didn't mean that. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know how to fight this without losing more. Ruth set Thomas down, her voice steady. Then we fight it together. I won't stand by while you get taken. Jack met her eyes then, and for the first time, she saw fear there, not of losing land, but of needing someone enough to stay. All right, he said finally. Together. The word settled like a promise, unpolished, uncertain, but real. Word spread fast in small places, and by the next week half the county seemed to know the ranch was in trouble. Wagons slowed on the trail to stare. Women whispered at the well when Ruth passed. She kept her chin up, walking through the judgment like tall grass. On market day, she rode into town with a basket of bread and Thomas beside her. Jack followed behind, hauling lumber to sell. When they reached the square, the sheriff stood near the auction board, posting notices. Tax overdue, he said flatly, nailing one marked Whitaker Ranch. Jack stepped forward, calm but unbending. I'll pay by harvest. The sheriff shrugged. Not my problem if the bank won't wait. Then a man from the crowd sneered. Maybe that woman of yours can bake her way out of it. Laughter rippled, cruel and easy. Ruth's face burned, but she didn't look away. She stepped past Jack, voice steady but clear enough to still the noise. I've worked since I was 12. I'll work till my hands can't, but I won't be shamed for it. The square went quiet. Even the sheriff shifted. Jack's hand hovered near her back, pride breaking through the quiet storm in his chest. You heard her, he said low. We're not for sale. He took Ruth's basket, set it on the table beside the auction sign, and opened the cloth. Inside, a dozen loaves still warm from the morning. He cut one in half and handed it to a farmer nearby. On the house, he said. If you like it, tell the bank this ranch feeds people. One by one, hands reached out, timid, then certain. Coins dropped into Ruth's basket, not pity, just payment. The sheriff cleared his throat, uncomfortable with decency breaking the usual order. By sundown, every loaf was gone, and the notice was torn from the board. As the last wagon left, Ruth stood on the porch of the general store, watching the road burn orange in the setting sun. Jack came up behind her, his hand brushing hers. Not to claim, just to share the quiet victory. Guess we ain't beaten yet, he said softly. No, she replied, eyes still on the horizon. Just beginning. Autumn settled like a blessing over the valley, the fields gold and breathing under the low Montana sun. The fight for the ranch had changed something deeper than ownership. It had bound the house, the land, and the two hearts that refused to give up on either. Ruth woke before dawn that morning, the firelight touching her face as Thomas slept nearby, his curls haloed in glow. Outside, the wind carried the smell of hay and smoke, a quiet promise that winter would soon come. Jack was already in the yard, splitting logs, the echo steady and sure. She watched for a while through the window before stepping outside, shawl drawn around her shoulders. You never rest, she said softly. Wood don't split itself, he answered, but the teasing in his voice was new. a kind of peace she hadn't heard in him before. She crossed the yard and handed him a tin mug of coffee, her hand lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. "We made it," she whispered. "The bank took the debt." Jack nodded. "You paid it, Ruth. You and those loaves." She smiled. "You gave them courage to buy." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes warm beneath the brim of his hat. "You think I did this for the ranch?" he asked quietly. She tilted her head, puzzled. "Then for what?" He set down the axe, wiped his palms, and stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the cold air shift between them. "For you," he said simply. "You walked up that road with nothing but a child and pride, and somehow you gave both of us a life." Her eyes filled, but she didn't hide it. "Jack," she whispered, voice trembling. "I never asked for—" "I know," he said, cutting in softly. "That's why I trust you." Behind them, Thomas giggled from the porch, holding a wooden toy horse Jack had carved. The sound drew them both to smile. Jack reached out, brushing his thumb along Ruth's jaw, a gesture barely there but full of meaning. "You're home," he said, repeating the first words he'd ever given her. This time she didn't flinch. She believed him. The valley exhaled in sunlight as Ruth turned toward the cabin, the boy laughing in the doorway, and Jack's voice carrying after her like a vow, quiet but sure, the word that would outlast every season. Stay. What do you think? Was it fate that brought her to that door, or mercy that made him open it? Tell me which moment hit you hardest, the knock, the storm, or the word home.